David Harvey, 17 Contradictions and the End of Capitalism. In 17 Contradictions and the End of Capitalism, David Harvey dissects the inherent contradictions within the capitalist system and discusses how they are interwoven into the fabric of society. By exploring key concepts such as the discrepancy between use value and exchange value, the relationship between labor and capital, technology's impact on the workforce, and environmental sustainability, this book's summary offers an insightful examination of capitalism's pitfalls and the need for change. As you venture through the summary, the vital themes of inequalities driven by capitalism and looming threats to economic, social, and environmental stability will pose thought-provoking questions about the future.
The dilemma of use and exchange value. When an item's exchange value becomes more important than its use value, contradictions may arise, which can lead to financial crises. In this book excerpt, the author highlights the concept of use value and exchange value in an attempt to explain the contradictions that often result in financial crises. According to the author, people buy items based on their use value, which means that they acquire things that are useful to them. However, everything that people buy has both a use value and an exchange value. Exchange value is the actual cost of production plus the profit that can be made from selling an item. The author posits that in many capitalist societies, exchange value is dependent on speculation. Factors such as location, prestige, and past ownership can influence the exchange value of a property. Buyers and producers are mainly interested in exchange value, which can lead to a crisis that arises from the discrepancy between use value and exchange value. The author cites the housing market crisis in the United States between 2007 and 2009 as an example of the contradictions that can arise between use value and exchange value. Prior to the crisis, housing speculation soared. As people hoped to profit from rising exchange values, they borrowed money to buy into safe housing. Eventually, the pursuit of exchange value destroyed access to housing as a use value. The speculation drove property values higher than many people could afford to pay, and approximately 4 million people lost their homes due to foreclosure. The author's message is that when an item's exchange value becomes more important than its use value, contradictions can arise, leading to financial crises. Therefore, people should be cautious and not focus solely on an item's exchange value when making purchasing decisions. The paradox of money. Money is not just a means of exchanging goods and services but also a representation of value. However, the digitization of money and its detachment from physical labor creates a contradiction between its limitless potential quantity and the limits of labor. Moreover, money being a commodity in itself can be bought and sold, which is not true for other types of measurements. This contradiction arises because money is used both to affirm private property rights and for public interest through state power. Therefore, the paradox of money lies in the contradiction between its dual nature as a measure of social value and a commodity. The paradox of dispossession. There are two ways to accumulate wealth, legally through market exchanges or illegally through dispossession. Dispossession refers to the non-consensual seizure of property. The creation of private capital has a foundation in dispossession, such as the enclosure movement in 18th century Britain that privatized common lands and the present-day land grabs in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Another form of dispossession can be seen in the contradictory relationship between labor and capital. Capital is created when workers produce more in commodity values than they are paid. This results in laborers being dispossessed from the real value of their labor. Workers strive for higher wages and better working conditions while capitalists fight to cut wages and increase productivity to boost profits. The continuous conflict between labor and capital highlights the paradox of dispossession and the flawed nature of capitalism. The contradiction of capital circulation. The circulation of capital is inherently contradictory as it faces potential barriers and delays in the transition from money to commodities and vice versa. Despite capitalists overcoming these challenges, the transformation of value into money in the market is complicated. As a result, capitalists are perpetually caught in a conundrum, where minimizing labor costs threatens workers' buying power, while augmenting workers' buying power through efficient production costs potential profits. The contradictions of capital. The effects of increasing automation and division of labor on the future of work is a contradiction of capital that poses a threat to society, both materially and psychologically. In this section of the book, the author explores the moving contradictions of capital, specifically the relationship between technological change and the future of work. While labor has been a source of value that allows capital to generate profits, the displacement of human labor due to automation and robotization is becoming increasingly prevalent. As a result, larger segments of the world's population become redundant from the standpoint of capital, leading to a decrease in demand, jobs, and incomes. Furthermore, the division of labor, which is essential to capital's efficiency, makes the worker feel redundant. The separation of complex productive activities into specific but simple tasks leaves little room for personal development, motivation, and ownership for the laborer. This contradiction poses a threat to not only the worker's efficiency but also their psychological well-being. Overall, this section highlights how these contradictions of capital, inherent features that are unaltered by changes in politics or technology, are becoming increasingly unstable and pose a threat to society. As technology advances and jobs become automated, society must find ways to ensure that everyone can still contribute and thrive. Capitalism's love-hate relationship with monopoly. Capitalism advocates for competition, but paradoxically, this economic system is built on monopolies. The monopoly power of major companies like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft is undermined by their market domination, yet they are vital to capitalism's core. Although capitalists claim they prefer competition, they tend to choose monopolies when allowed, aggregating capital into megacorporations and setting up strategic alliances in industries to dominate the markets. Additionally, companies resort to cost minimization by dispersing operations, resulting in clusters of businesses in specific regions, increasing the area's perceived value and attracting more capital and labor. However, relocation generates crises of devaluation, and the influx of capital creates value in a region, which ultimately gets destroyed once the cheap production opportunities for capitalists disappear. The paradox of capital and labor. During the industrial age, the working class was exploited with pitiful wages and overworked hours. Karl Marx recognized the need to limit the length of the working day, not only to protect laborers but also to protect the reproduction of capital. If workers could not cover their living expenses or reproduce, capital's access to an efficient labor force would diminish, leading to no profits from labor and no means for capital to reproduce itself. Today, laborers are paid to maintain a decent standard of living, making it possible for them to be exploited to generate profits for capitalists. Social democracy can provide social welfare via pension plans, insurance, and healthcare, but capital is hesitant to bear the costs of social reproduction. Capital is interested in an educated workforce but has successfully passed on the costs of acquiring skills to households, kindergartens, and public schools. The paradox of capital is that it is dependent on labor but reluctant to ensure the social reproduction of labor it needs. The contradiction of capital. In a capitalist society, a disparity between those who can achieve financial freedom and those who can't is created by capital. Such disparities between freedom of capital and freedom of others are a contradiction of capital. Gross inequalities might be a harbinger of a looming economic crisis. The resulting disparity of wealth leads to friction between freedom of capital and freedom of others. The poor, lacking an income that frees them from want, are locked out of the realm of true freedom, and will be ruled by capital as long as they are struggling to earn a living. The freedom of capital thus rests on the lack of freedom of others. The perils of compound growth. The book mentions that capital's search for perpetual compounding growth to gain huge profits is a dangerous contradiction. Compound growth is the simple concept of money growth, where the money grows each year faster than the previous year. Capitalists believe that growth is achieved through their investments of capital. But, is perpetual compounding growth possible? The answer is no, it represents a dangerous contradiction. Money represents social value, hence, increasing quantities of money mean increasing social value, such as bridges or roads. Capital tries to find new markets by identifying human capital or nature capital, like forests or rivers. Nevertheless, as money accumulates faster every year, it becomes impossible to find corresponding social value, leading to an illusory monetary value that can cause an economic disaster. This is a dangerous contradiction of capital that threatens economic, environmental, and social balance. Capitalism threatens existence. Capitalism's continuous hunger for profits causes damage to the environment and evokes a revolt of human nature, posing a threat to our existence. This degradation of ecosystems will result in an environmental disaster that will be accelerated by the pressure of continued compound growth. Furthermore, capitalism destroys the basis for creating profits from natural resources by destroying those resources. Alienation from work will eventually evoke a revolt of human nature against its domination by capital, posing a dangerous contradiction that threatens social cohesion. Something must be done to change the way we live and produce.
Upon reviewing the summary of 17 Contradictions and the End of Capitalism, it becomes evident that capitalism fosters numerous contradictions that exacerbate social and economic inequality, hinder environmental sustainability, and propel an inherent conflict between labor and capital. The need for change is critical, as the continuation of such contradictions not only erodes the planet's resources but also threatens global stability. With a comprehensive understanding of the issues at hand, it is our collective responsibility to work towards solutions that reconcile these contradictions and strive for a more equitable and sustainable world.